Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Greg Sloop, and it's time for Live at 5 on this Wednesday, February 26th, 2025. Hope you're having a great day. Another gorgeous day here in Carolina. Going to be in the 70s today. We are continuing our one-year journey through the New Testament. We're looking at Mark chapter 13 today on day 41 of our journey. Remember, we only do weekdays, so we're a few less days than the year has progressed because we take the weekends off from this part. We do a separate Bible study on Sunday. We're going through Psalm 119 right now, reading through, talking through, and praying through Psalm 119. So I hope you'll join us for all of them, Monday through Friday for the journey through the New Testament, and then on Sunday, Psalm 119. Today, as I said, Mark 13 is our passage. We are looking at verse 1, starting in verse 1, the first section of the chapter entitled Questions from the Disciples. Verse 1 starts like this: Then as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, Teacher, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here? And Jesus answered and said to him, Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when all these things will be fulfilled? What do we need to think about here? This passage gives a bit more detail than the parallel in Matthew 24. It describes exactly what the disciples said about the buildings and who it was that sat with Jesus on the Mount of Olives. This story is a bit unusual. It's a bit perplexing. It's uncertain why someone would point out the greatness of the buildings. Jesus had been there many times and was, in fact, quite aware of the building of those structures, as he was part of the planning committee for the structure as he gave them the instructions how to build. If they believed he was the Son of God, then that should be obvious. However, it did offer an opportunity for Jesus to make clear that the temple in Jerusalem was not eternal. He represented a kingdom and a temple not made with hands that would be eternal. So that's why he said, not one stone will be left on another. You can brag about these stones all you want to, but not one will be left on top of another. They're all going to be torn down because this is not eternal. This is temporary. Then he moves into a passage that talks about the tribulation, beginning in verse 5. Now, before I begin reading this, I want you to understand there are a lot of different theories about the tribulation period. Some are pre-trib, some mid-trib, some post-trib, some no-trib. There are some that are amillennialist. There's all kinds of theories out there. Just a quick rundown. Pre-trib means a pre-tribulation rapture. At the very beginning of the tribulation period, the church is raptured out. Mid-trib says that we'll go through the first 3 years, but we won't face the wrath. They call it a pre-wrath tribulation. The first 3 years are peaceful. The last 3 years are full of conflict. There are post-trib that say we'll go through the entire tribulation period. Jesus comes once, and that's the only time that we get relief. And then there's the no-trib, that it's just an allegory for what we're going through right now. I'm a pre-tribber. I believe that we're going to go in the rapture prior to the tribulation period, but at the same time, scriptures like the one we're going to look at today may cause you to have a little bit of confusion about that. So we're going to read through it. We're going to look at all the possibilities, and we're going to come up with something that we think answers the question that you may have when we're finished here about the tribulation. First, in verse 5. And Jesus answering them began to say, Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and will deceive many. But when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be troubled, for such things must happen, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be earthquakes in various places, and there will be famines and troubles. These are the beginning of sorrows. But watch out for yourselves, for they will deliver you up to councils, and you will be beaten in the synagogues. You will be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a testimony to them. And the gospel must first be preached to all nations. But when they arrest you and deliver you up, do not worry beforehand or premeditate what you will speak. But whatever is given you in that hour, speak that, for it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit. Now brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down into the house, nor enter to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter. For in those days there will be tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the creation which God created until this time, nor ever shall be. And unless the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he chose, he shortened the days. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or look, here he is there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. But take heed. See, I have told you all things beforehand. Now, this does not, I think, refer to the Great Tribulation. This does not refer to the 7 years when the Lord will come. This says the time is coming for his coming, but it's not yet when you hear all these things. So these are the things leading up to the rapture of the church. This passage is a bit shorter than the one in Matthew, offers more detail in some areas and less in others. It's a few verses shorter than the Matthew passage. This is Jesus' warning about events leading up to his coming. Times will be dangerous for Christians. The world will be in political and national uproar. Families will be divided and in conflict. Kind of sounds like the last election cycle. False prophets will claim to be or represent Christ. This will be a time of great uncertainty and trouble. An international leader may rise up with answers to all the problems. We must be aware, but remain true to God in the midst of it all. Serve only Jesus Christ and do not be deceived. This passage describes many things that are happening right now in our world in 2025 and just previous, so be aware of the times. Then he moves to a discussion of the second coming, beginning in verse 24. But in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars of heaven will fall, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send his angels and gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest part of the earth to the farthest part of heaven. Now here's where it gets a little dicey for me. This passage describes the actual coming of the Lord. And while this description lends itself to describing elements of both what we would call the rapture and the coming of the Lord after the tribulation period, most scholars feel that the timing is to be interpreted as covering the larger event of the coming of the Lord, rapture and coming back with the armies of heaven to do battle with the earth. Gathering the elect is a rapture image, while the moon darkening and the stars falling is part of the tribulation or near the latter part. We must be ready at all times, for we do not have a pinpoint on when these things will happen. In Matthew, the gathering of the elect is just mentioned to happen in heaven, whereas Mark describes it being a gathering from heaven and earth. Perhaps this is just talking about the people of God coming back with Christ for the battle of Armageddon, which is at the end of the tribulation period. It may be that it's describing, and they're gathering them from the four corners of the earth, the heavens, to come back and ride behind Jesus while he does battle with all the armies of the earth. And the blood is up to the bridles of the horses and all the other things that passage talks about in Revelation. But it may be that the earth reference is to those few who died during the tribulation for standing up for their faith as the ones that are gathered from the earth If so, then this is, like described in Matthew, just a gathering of the saints to ride with Jesus when he comes to do battle in Armageddon. If we do believe that, though, then the tribulation in the previous passage, which was Mark 13:5 through 23, may actually be a description of the tribulation, or at least a description of the time leading up to it and the time after it. I'm not trying to be hard to pin down. I'm not trying to say any particular thing is one thing or not. All I'm trying to say is there is imagery here of the second coming of the Lord, the second part where he comes back after the tribulation to do battle with the armies of the earth in the battle of Armageddon, in the valley of Megiddo. So that's what I think most of this is talking about in Mark chapter 14, Mark chapter 13, Mark chapter 13. So then he goes on to discuss the parable of the fig tree, starting in verse 28. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see these things happening, know that it is near, at the doors. Surely I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. What do we need to think about here? This passage is also a parallel of one in Matthew 24. It's almost word for word with the Matthean passage. He speaks of Israel when he mentions the fig tree, according to many scholars. The budding of the fig tree is interpreted as referring to the reformation of Israel as a nation in 1948. If this is correct, if it has validity, and some people think it does, it is speculation, but it seems to have that validity. And if it is correct, Jesus' return would precede the death of the last person alive in 1948 in Israel. The number of people alive then is dwindling quickly, because people who would be alive in 1948, in 1940 till now is 85 years. 1948 to now, take 8 off of that, is 77 years. So someone born in 1948, just before that event happened, would be 77 years old. If we look at this and we say the numbers are valid, and that is what we need to look at, by at very least 23 years from now, which would mean that someone born in 1948, just before the nation was reformed, would be 100 years old 23 years from now. 100 years old 23 years from now. 23 years from now, this is 2025, 23 years from now would be 2053. 2053. I'm not saying the Lord will come back by 2053. I am not saying that. But if the budding of the fig tree signified the reforming of the nation of Israel in 1948, if that is what, in fact, we're talking about, then by 2053, we're probably going to see the Lord come. Now, don't go tell anybody. Pastor Greg, Dr. Sloop, he said the Lord's coming by 2053. I hope I'm still alive then. 23 years from now, I'll just be a young 85. But there are some that will be much older. I was not born in 1948, by the way, when Israel was formed as a nation. Then the next passage talks about an exhortation to watch. Verse 32 is where it starts. But of that day and hour, no one knows. See, that's why I'm not guaranteeing it. I'm not guaranteeing that the Lord will be coming back by 2053. That's not something I'm willing to say, because of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Take heed, watch, pray, for you do not know when the time is. It is like a man going to a far country, who left his house and gave authority to his servants, and to each his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to keep watch. Before I say that, though, let me go back. I do have to do one little cultural thing that was just a travesty. In 1987, a guy wrote a booklet, if you will, and it said 88 reasons why Jesus will come back in 1988. What year is this? 2025. Yeah, 1988, because a generation is roughly considered a 40-year span. A generation is a 40-year span in Jewish thinking. So 40 years, that generation from the time of the reforming of Israel, that would have ended in 1988 if that were a literal, definite, no doubt about it thought. But it is not, it was not, and the man that wrote the booklet came back and said 89 reasons why he definitely will come back in 1989. I'm telling you, I'm glad they didn't do anything for 1990. That would have just been embarrassing. All I do know is this: we can count on one thing, that we don't know the day or the hour, but we are going to be responsible for being ready when he comes. So, of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Take heed, watch, and pray, for you do not know when the time is. It is like a man going to a far country, who left his house, gave authority to his servants, and to each his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to watch. Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening, at midnight, at the crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say to you, I say to all, watch. The parallel Matthew passage is longer. It includes a reference to the two will be this, one will be taken, and the other left scenarios, which Mark does not include. The sentiment is similar, but the storylines are different. This passage speaks of the uncertainty of the timing of the coming of the Lord. While the previous passage spoke of a general timetable, the generation alive during the budding of the fig tree, this passage makes it clear that no one knows the exact day or time. The message is clear. Don't be sleeping when Jesus comes. Watch and do not be caught unaware. And if you're going to remember anything from today's Bible study, anything from this program, remember that. Don't be caught sleeping when Jesus comes. Watch and do not be caught unaware. And that's the word for today. This is pre-recorded. We have staff meeting on Wednesdays, and usually we go a little past 5. So this is pre-recorded. I wanted to make sure you got it, even though I wouldn't be in here live today. I do appreciate you being with us. Spend time with God every day in the Word of God and prayer. Tomorrow morning, another blog will pop up about 6 a.m. on my blog site, gregsloop.com, gregsloop.com. It'll pop up tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Watch it sometime tomorrow, and then come right back here where you're seeing live at 5 now, and watch us discuss it. You can ask questions. You can enter things into the chat feature. We would love to hear from you, and I hope you'll take the time to be with us tomorrow for Live at 5. Please know we're praying for you, and I look forward to seeing each of you again tomorrow, live